Everything Old is New Again, America's entertainment pop culture talk show.
It may well possess a rudimentary intelligence.
I'm trying to think, but nothing happens.
Felt a great disturbance in the force.
Hello, I'm Mr. Red.
Come on, Mark, like a dog for me.
Where's the goodies? Leave the gun. Take the cannoli.
I bet you wouldn't have done anything like this if Mom and Dad were here.
You filthy criminal.
Excuse me while I whip this out.
Go ahead. Make my day.
Here are your hosts, Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
I must congratulate you, Mr. Holmes. You're far more clever than I thought.
Thank you, Mrs. Courtney. Praise from you is indeed gratifying. I shall always cherish the memory of your flattering words.
Memory? Oh, thank you.
And now I have a most regrettable task to perform.
Holmes, you all right?
Perfectly, thank you, old fellow, but I think this gentleman on the floor requires some medical attention. We must see that he looks his best, you know, when he's hanged.
There we are. Douglas Viviani here on Everything Old is New Again. It was Basil Rathbone, if you don't remember, and Nigel Bruce playing Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson in a movie in 1946, Dressed to Kill. They did tons of movies back then. Why am I talking about that? I don't know. I'm talking to myself today because David Cohen, my usual co-host, is unavailable today. But fear not, there is no mystery. He's not disappeared. We know where he is. He'll be back next week to enjoy some more pop culture here on Everything Old is New Again. But in his place, we have the honor of hosting the man who many feel literally saved the Star Trek franchise after the release of the first movie. Nicholas Meyer is the writer, director, and he's known for his best-selling Sherlock Holmes novels, but one in particular, the screenplay for the 7% Solution, that movie, which was terrific in the 70s. He directed and wrote Time After Time, Star Trek II, Wrath of Khan, co-wrote Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home with Leonard Nimoy, and wrote and directed Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country. Nicholas Meyer also wrote the TV miniseries Houdini and directed the TV movie The Day After, just to mention a few of his projects. But now, the long-awaited sequel, the fourth and the latest Sherlock Holmes novels, The Adventure of the Peculiar Protocols, has just been published and can be found all over, including Amazon.com. Welcome, Nicholas Meyer.
Thank you.
Take a little bit of time to introduce you because you've got great credits, a great list. I left out a lot of things, but that's what it's all about here, and Everything Old is New Again, just to catch up a little bit. Now here, we are talking about the fourth novel that's coming out. You had three previous ones: the international bestseller, of course, 7% Solution in 74, the West End Horror in 76, then the Canary Trainer in 93, and now The Adventure of the Peculiar Protocols. Now, these are Sherlock Holmes novels, brand new novels, so to speak, in retrospect. And the question I had to begin to start us off is, why Sherlock Holmes? Did you, listen to and watch maybe WPIX back in the day when you grew up in New York City and on a Saturday afternoon watching these old Basil Rathbone and Nigel Bruce movies? Or did you read the Arthur Conan Doyle books? Or where did your fascination for Sherlock Holmes come from?
My fascination began when I was about 11, and my father gave me the complete one-volume Sherlock Holmes stories all in one place, 60 stories, and I was hooked. I never liked most of the movies. I never liked the Basil Rathbone movies. I thought he might be a good Holmes, but I never understood why he was hanging out with a jerk.
Right.
I didn't understand why a genius needed the company of a sort of a buffoon. So I thought that Hollywood got Watson all wrong. Maybe now, if I saw it again, I'd be more tolerant, but it just wasn't my cup of tea. And I think writing the 7% Solution, when I finally got around to it, was an attempt on my part to do a sort of corrective to the campy versions of Holmes that I was seeing, on TV and in the movies, which I didn't care for.
And they always did do that. In all the different, not all, many of the incarnations, it's Holmes hanging out with. You're right. With it's well, let's put it this way: birds of a feather usually flock together, and like you say, why would someone that has that talent tolerate, if you will, as he doesn't tolerate a lot of other people of the same ilk? Why would he tolerate someone that is sort of inept, if you will? But I guess that's a great perception, even at 11 years old. And I've got a 10-year-old, so I think it's about time to introduce her to these stories, because they really. You tell me, do they not stand the test of time? And you could read them today, including, of course, your novels. But I'm talking about the original to start off with, to this day, and still apply. They still work, don't they?
They absolutely still work. That is the secret sauce of their endurance, their success, is that they are masterful stories. I mean, there's 56 short ones and 4 novellas, and they're not all equally good, but the level of quality throughout is pretty surprising. If your daughter likes to read, then this is, 11 is about the perfect age to begin them. It never ends. The other thing that I think you find is that they sort of cover every kind of human situation. It's like a sort of a lay Bible, whether you're talking about the mafia or early Mormonism or drug addiction or interracial marriage or what have you, LSD. It's all there, one way or another, with, as I say, a surprising degree of consistency. Michael Chabon said all fiction is fan fiction. So it shouldn't be any surprise that when you run out of those 60 stories, you are tempted to sort of write your own, which was certainly where I began, more or less.
And haven't people been doing that since then, too, all the way up to and recently? And I'll agree, not all of these are tremendous, but just recently, just to get an idea, you've had the couple of Robert Downey Jr. movies. You got the comedy with Will Ferrell, which was not very good, but okay, it was out there just last year. You got the TV show with Benedict Cumberbatch as Sherlock. That Elementary show is on for 7 years. It just finished its run. So people have been doing that for quite a while, not with the success I would suggest that you have done it with. And I think you're looking into it and kind of giving us a peel behind, peeling the onion a little bit and showing us that it's not just the observations of Sherlock Holmes. It's not just him solving a problem or a murder every single time. There's different kinds of mysteries, different kinds of motivations, and of course, starting with the 7% solution. And I'm sure in the adventure of the Peculiar Protocols, there's more behind the story than just some character solving murders or mysteries, as a general term. You've got more. You've, I think, added more character study to this. And why does Holmes have this and that habit? Why does Moriarty, and who's Moriarty? Why are they such arch enemies and things like that? That add to me so much more to it than just trying to figure out. Boy, did he figure this out because the guy had I don't know, a piece of lint on his jacket that was white, and the one he murdered had white hair or something silly like that.
Well, I would certainly be pleased to think so. The other thing that occurred to me going back to this Nigel Bruce thing is that not only can you not understand why a genius hangs out with a buffoon, but you don't recognize in Nigel Bruce the narrative voice that you read when you read Doyle, presumably channeling Watson, and how Watson sounds on the page is nothing like what Watson seems like in those movies. And yes, the question of character really absorbed my attention, because the rest is just sort of mechanics. And it's true that we do like detective stories. We like them because they deliver the opposite of what they promise. They promise thrills and chills and gore and murder and mayhem. But in fact, we like to curl up with them. We like to curl up with a good mystery. We like to take them to bed with us, and a more intimate conjunction can hardly be imagined. And why? Because real life is an anarchic proposition, and things happen for no earthly reason. you walk along, you fall into a manhole, and you die. But in detective stories, it all adds up, as the lead character is always saying. Everything happens for a reason. So they may appear to depict real life, but in fact they are reassuring you that things make sense. So I think that if you don't add character to it, then it becomes simply sort of a mechanistic exercise in reassurance, which is fine as far as it goes. But I guess it wasn't enough for me.
And it does reveal to us the man behind the new and tremendous series of books, The Adventure of the Peculiar Protocols. Nicholas Meyer will be back right after this on Everything Old is New Again. The books pack an abundance of suspense, intrigue, and Holmesian flavor, says book page. We'll be back right after this on Everything Old is New Again.
You're listening to Everything Old is New Again, America's entertainment pop culture talk show with Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
You're listening to Everything Old is New Again. My name is Nicholas Meyer. I am the writer-director of Star Trek II, The Wrath of Kahn, and several Sherlock Holmes novels, including the forthcoming The Adventure of the Peculiar Protocol.
Oh, that's a conundrum here. We're back here on Everything Old is New Again. That's a tape of Nicholas Meyer introducing Everything Old is New Again. And meanwhile, we have Nicholas Meyer right here live on the show. So how did that happen? Is that possible? Is it time travel? No. As Sherlock Holmes would say, once you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, no matter how improbable, must be the truth. And in this case, of course, time travel is impossible. We have Nicholas Meyer right here, and he was also on our show back maybe 3 months ago, show number 263. You can look up on everythingoldisnewagain.biz, everythingoldisnewagain.biz. If you missed that interview, you have to hear that. It's a lot of fun. We're continuing now, and we're focusing with Nicholas Meyer on The Adventure of the Peculiar Protocols, his new novel, a Sherlock Holmes novel. Now, welcome back, Mr. Meyer.
Thank you again.
It'd take a long time to get wound up here, but I wanted to go to the heart and the root of, first of all, the murder mystery itself, or the detective story. And to many, Edgar Allan Poe's Murder in the Rue Morgue from 1841 was the genesis of all of that. And he laid out some rules that I believe Sherlock Holmes and, of course, Arthur Conan Doyle followed with respect to detective stories. And among other things, basically, what I can read from my research and reading Edgar Allan Poe's and, of course, Arthur Conan Doyle's works is that you need to give the reader the clues that are there. You can't just pull out of that hat at the end of the story some clue that you didn't reveal. Now, for example, the murderer, I don't know, turns out to be like a milk drinker or something. Somewhere in the story, he's got to have had milk around his apartment, or drank milk, or had milk spilled on him, or something like that, or a milk mustache or something silly, where, you know, at least later on in the book, when it's revealed that that's the clue that sunk this character, you go, oh, I missed that a couple of 100 pages ago. Why didn't I think about that? You know, it's like a puzzle, and if you miss these pieces, you at least you can't blame the author because it was presented to you. Does that make sense? And do you follow those conventions that were established way back when?
Well, the short answer is yes, I do, and probably for the reason that there's something that audiences, and I include movie audiences, find so fascinating when things that went by them, things they didn't know or that they had forgotten, swing around. When we did Star Trek II, we killed off Spock in the first scene of the movie because it's my theory that nobody remembers the first 5 minutes of the movie, and then you go off on this big adventure, and then suddenly you see Spock's empty chair as the movie works toward its climax, and you suddenly go, oh, wait, I forgot.
Right.
This movie is about the death of Spock. And similarly, when I did The Human Stain, I killed off the lovers at the beginning, who were played by Anthony Hopkins and Nicole Kidman. I killed them off at the beginning of the movie, but everybody forgets that they're dead because they're watching the rest of the movie, and then you go, oh, gee. And there's something that is cool about that. And it's also cool when you have planted all the clues and the movie, I'm thinking of movies at the moment, but it also applies to books, becomes a totally different experience when you read or watch it for the second time. And this time you see what was under your nose,
right,
but which you know, as Watson is always being told by Holmes, you know, you see but you do not observe, or you observe but you do not see. I can think of two French movies off the top of my head, The Return of Martin Guerre, and also a wonderful movie about Napoleon on St. Helena, which is called Monsieur N, as in N for knife, in which you watch the movie and all the clues are presented right in front of you, but you, chances are, don't notice them, and then you sort of rejoice when it's all pulled together at the end, and you go, oh gosh, I missed that. And then the second time you watch it, you see a whole bunch of things that you missed, or you read a whole bunch of things that went right by you.
And you basically can match wits with the lead character too, which is what really some of the fun is. I've seen that, like, I know this is an obscure reference. This came to mind as the old Tim Hutton show, written by the same people that did Columbo, the Ellery Queen, where they literally turn to the camera maybe 45 minutes into the hour-long show and say, okay, that's it. You've gotten all the clues. Do you know who did it? I mean, they were blatant about, you know, this formula. And I don't know why it didn't work all that well. I just loved it, and I think that's part of the fun, is being able to be to match wits with Sherlock Holmes and the adventure of the peculiar protocols, and have it just be a fair game, that all the clues he has, you have. Lots of writers, don't do that. I've seen Agatha Christie on a number of times. I've read them, and at the end, all of a sudden, the candlestick comes out of nowhere, and it was never mentioned before, you know? Anyway, it kind of upsets the reader, so I'm happy to hear, and I know in the past you have done that, so it's a lot of fun to read these books. And one of them was The Canary Trainer, where Holmes was actually offended to being compared to See Who Goes to Pan, which was Edgar Allan Poe's detective in The Murders of the Rue Morgue. And I love that you put that in there. So certainly, obviously, you were aware of that character. Did you become aware of that work before, after, or during your introduction to Sherlock Holmes?
I think I started, my dad, who introduced me to all this stuff, probably introduced me to Edgar Allan Poe at about the same time. I think the story that I read first was called The Gold Bug, and that's the story in which you are required to break a code, and watching the man break the code was fascinating and very plausible, and it's sort of how codes, I think, are typically approached when someone's trying to break them, certainly if they're in English. And so that was, I think that's where I began. But I would also suggest that maybe the greatest detective story, although we don't typically think of it as a detective story, is Oedipus, because Oedipus sets out to solve a murder, and the cool, amazing twist is that the murderer that he's looking for is himself.
Right.
And everybody keeps saying, in the best detective story tradition, don't poke your nose into this. You'll be sorry. You stay out of it. And he can't, in the same way that human beings can't control our curiosity, our desire to know. We must know. Or as Hamlet says, my soul cries out. We have to know.
And especially when someone tells you not to know, or that I know and you shouldn't know and you should never know, that kind of spurs you on even more. And the author of and screenwriter of My Favorite Year says Nicholas Meyer's new novel brings some welcome new dimension to the characters of both Holmes and Watson, as well as delivering a suspenseful narrative enhanced by remarkable period detail. More importantly, the book's main themes, painfully relevant to our current age, make it surprisingly vital a surprisingly vital and urgent read. That's The Adventure of the Peculiar Protocols. We're here with Nicholas Meyer. One quick question before we take a break in a few moments. In your other works, with some historical figures interact with our hero, of course, Sherlock Holmes, like Sigmund Freud, George Bernard Shaw, Oscar Wilde, Bram Stoker. Should we or could we expect anything like that, or anyone that we recognize without giving anything away, in The Adventure of the Peculiar Protocols?
Well, to me, simply juxtaposing Holmes with sort of famous people by itself, it isn't quite good enough.
Right.
The reason that Holmes meets Freud is very much germane to the subject of the novel, which has to do with drug addiction. And Freud was a cocaine user, and later, I think unofficially, not only kicked the habit, but helped others kick it as well. And as Holmes was a user, it seemed sort of natural, given their dates, their chronologies match, to put them together in a story. And by the same token, in the West End horror, the famous people that Holmes meets in March of 1895 are all people working in London's world of the theater, who were actually doing what they were really doing when Holmes comes amongst them to try and solve the murder. But otherwise, I'm not just interested in putting him together with famous people as a sort of substitute for an interesting narrative. The Adventure of the Peculiar Protocols is a pretty dark book, and he encounters some real people. But I don't know that most of your listeners would necessarily regard them as famous people, unless you're, interested in who were the founders of, for example, the NAACP, or who wrote The King of Schnorrers, or who the first president of the State of Israel is. Those people are all real people that are part of the mystery that Holmes and Watson are called upon to try and solve.
And we're going to continue to solve the mystery of the adventure. The mystery of the Adventure of the Peculiar Protocols with Nicholas Meyer behind the scenes a little bit. We're going to talk a little bit about Star Trek in a moment, but I still want to stay with, for the most part, Sherlock Holmes, because it's a fascinating topic and it's quite an interesting read. We'll be back right here, right now, and Everything Old is New Again. Give me 2 minutes. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Everything Old is New Again, America's entertainment pop culture talk show with Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
An ancestor of mine maintained that if you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth.
We are. The truth is that we are here on Everything Old is New Again with Nicholas Meyer, author of The Adventure of the Peculiar Protocols, a Sherlock Holmes novel, the fourth one that he has produced, and it is a tremendous read. Amazon.com, and anywhere you get your books, you can get this book. And please, if you have some feedback, let us know if you've read it, some comments and so forth. We can pass them along maybe, or at least discuss them on the air, you and I. And so let's talk about it at oldnewagain@AOL.com, oldnewagain@AOL.com. Nicholas Meyer, the obvious love of Sherlock Holmes that you have came alive there in that quote in the Star Trek movie, The Undiscovered Country. Spock's ancestor was considered could be Sherlock Holmes, which I think was a great touch. And you wrote that into the script, certainly, and you wrote a mystery into that script with Spock solving the mystery. Did you see him, obviously you did in some ways, as a Holmes type of character, at least in this episode?
There's no question that I've always spotted in the time that I've worked on Star Trek projects a certain basic resemblance between Spock and Sherlock. They are both, among other things, apostles of logic.
Right.
And Spock speaks in a kind of formal way that is not unreminiscent, one could imagine, of Sherlock, and I think it's probably no accident that Leonard Nimoy, the actor who plays Spock, had also played Sherlock Holmes on stage. So it all made a kind of sense.
And I love the references that you put into these Star Trek movies of classic works of art. I'm just going to play a quick clip here to bring the audience up to date on two separate quotes from two separate classic authors in the Wrath of Kahn.
No, you can't get away from hell's heart. I stab at thee for hate's sake. I spit my last breath at thee.
It's a far, far better thing I do than I have ever done before. A far better resting place I go to than I've ever known.
There you go. That first one was, of course, Moby Dick, Herman Melville. The second one, Charles Dickens' Tale of Two Cities, and that all was from The Wrath of Kahn. What do I say? These quotes are perfect for this movie and setting, of course. Why did you choose to use quotes from famous other works of art in that project?
Well, that's a very interesting question. I think a lot of times artists, painters, writers, what have you, we do things out of a kind of intuition or instinct, and you can't really intellectually explain them, which is quite awkward, by the way, when the head of the studio is asking you, well, why are you doing this?
Right.
And your best answer is, I don't know, it just kind of felt right. This all started, I think, the book thing on The Wrath of Kahn when I was trying to understand, and I didn't really, what Star Trek was, because I didn't used to watch the show. I didn't know. So I was sort of feeling my way around all this. And I said, so how come you never see a book anywhere? People don't read anymore. Whatever happened to that? And I was kind of wandering around my own library when I was talking to the producer, and I grabbed a book. I just grabbed the book, and the book I grabbed was A Tale of Two Cities. And it's the book that everybody knows the first and last lines of. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times, it was a far, far better thing. And then later, when it was time to write the screenplay, I found myself wondering about whether a book should be in the movie, and then realizing, gee, what an interesting bracket to bracket the movie with those opening and closing lines. So that's how that made it in. And then when Terrell and Chekhov land on CD Alpha 5, and they're going through Kahn's sort of marooned cargo bays and looking at the stuff, and again, working backwards, Kirk saying, I'm going to put you on this planet, and you get to take things with you. What does Kahn take? And I saw Kahn as a sort of a fallen angel along the lines of Lucifer, and I thought, what does a guy like that, take with him into exile? And in book terms, assuming he gets the run of the Enterprise library, well, he'll talk, he'll take Paradise Lost, he'll take Moby Dick, he'll take King Lear, all about sort of fallen kings and exiles. And so that's how Moby Dick worked its way in. And the rest of it was, laziness, because Melville and Dickens and Shakespeare, for that matter, write better dialogue than I do, and it's all free.
It's all the public domain, so to speak. And it does work though, because Sidney Carton is self-sacrifice is very similar to Spock's. So really, the Tale of Two Cities really worked beautifully there. They've used the Moby Dick theme after that, probably not giving you the credit that you deserve in other Star Trek movies. And I think it's a great nod to the past, and it really works beautifully. As did these Shakespeare quotes. Take a couple seconds here in Undiscovered Country.
Tickle us, do we not laugh? Trick us, do we not bleed? Wrong us, shall we not revenge?
Our revels now are ended, Kirk. Cry havoc, and let's slip the dogs of war. I am constant as the northern star.
To be or not to be.
I mean, you worked in The Merchant of Venice, The Tempest, Julius Caesar, and Hamlet into Star Trek, and I only chuckle in that I love it. It was just, it's so nice and rewarding to go to a movie that honors and reflects upon the past in a beautiful way. All of what we just talked about, obviously, I mean, you're a brilliant writer. It worked beautifully in these movies. They're not just there. And, but it's also rewarding when you know the quotes and you see the past coming alive. And just like our show, what we try to do is put a spotlight on the past and say, listen, what we're enjoying today in entertainment, it does rely upon things that the foundation that was done before. Let's not forget it. Let's just build upon it and improve upon it. And I really think that that's what you've done with these Star Trek movies. And I guess tip of the hat to you for whatever it's worth in that regard. I really love the way you did that. Do you subscribe to that the foundation of the entertainment of the past is relevant to what we're doing today?
Well, I think we are in great danger if we forget the past. Somebody said that those who do not learn the lessons that history teaches are condemned to repeat those lessons. And I'm a big believer in recycling. I like it in architecture. I long for it with garbage. God knows we need to figure out how to do it. And I like, everything old is new again. Yeah, that's the way I think art works. Art is a history of cut and paste from the very beginning. And as I think I was quoting Michael Chabon before, who said, all fiction is fan fiction. And that means you add to what has gone before. You do something, you may change it, you may add something to it, but you try to deck it out in new colors or score it differently. You know, there are, in fact, more than one orchestration of Handel's Messiah. Handel wrote it, and then Mozart did his version of it, and Sir Thomas Beecham. They kept usually adding more and more instruments to make it bigger and bigger and bigger, which may not always have been the best way to hear it, but in any case, you understand people sort of wanting to get in on the act and write your own Sherlock Holmes story and add and then mix and match. And this all seems to, tax our imaginations, our creativity, and please audiences and readers, because I think ever since we're kids, we like when things come full circle, when the end is my beginning, and so forth. That's somehow pleasing.
Right, and certainly nice to see something familiar, too. It sort of grounds you. Going to read a little something here from the annotated Sherlock Holmes editor, Leslie Klinger, about Nicholas Meyer's The Adventure of the Peculiar Protocols. Holmes and Watson reunite to eradicate the greatest lie ever told. In this thrilling and surprising new tale by Nicholas Meyer, the legendary author of The 7% Solution, why, oh why, Mr. Meyer, have you discovered owning 4 of these treasures in the past 44 years. We'll be back right here on Everything Old is New Again with Nicholas Meyer. One more section. We'll go out with the Undiscovered Country. A little quote from Peter Pan.
Second star to the right. And straight on till morning.
This is Everything Old is New Again, America's entertainment pop culture talk show, with Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
I believe Detective Columbo would be my rightful successor.
Your heir apparent, if you will.
Yes.
That's a nice way to phrase it. I do phrase a nice phrase every now and again. Don't need credit for it whatsoever, but...
well, we're going to go with apparent successor, but good try.
No surprise there. We're back on Everything Old is New again. Listeners of our show will recognize those two as our version of Holmes and Watson. We're through the technology of radio, and we've been able to reach back into the Victorian age and have them on our show, and we're just being silly with it, but believe it or not, they're one of our most popular incarnations or most popular creations. We play Holmes as an egotistical self-promoter, and gets credit for Watson is the one that's usually solving and pointing the hints of the clues out to Holmes to solve the problem. But Holmes is the one that gets all the credit. So there's some tension there. We just have some fun with it. But I just thought I would throw that clip in there just to show you that, and I guess you know this, but our listeners don't. Holmes and Watson have been alive and for a long, long time, and even a little show like ours to kind of use them as characters is so much fun and take a different take on it. And I just think that it's amazing that the detective story and especially Holmes and Watson are still here to this day. And we're, of course, with Nicholas Meyer, The Adventure of the Peculiar Protocols has just been released. You've got to get involved with this book on Amazon or wherever you get books from. Before I get into that, I just wanted to ask Mr. Meyer, do you agree or do you even consider or think of anyone that could be a modern-day successor to Sherlock Holmes? Would it be Columbo? Would it matter? Do you even think about such things?
I don't know how much I think about Holmes' successor. I mean, remember, Holmes is also quite athletic in Doyle's stories. He's a champion athlete, single-stick player, and so forth. I mean, clearly the model started with Don Quixote and Sancho Panza, and then there comes Holmes and Watson, and then there comes Batman and Robin. I'm wondering, I always loved Columbo. I think it's a challenge to create a detective. It's really interesting that detectives turn out to be heroes at all, because I think a lot of the times when you read about or encounter real detectives, there's something slightly smarmy about the whole thing. Right. These gumshoes, these, and then you sometimes even come to love them, which is sort of the Columbo thing. The Sam Spade, the private eye, the tough private eye, the Continental Op. That was another one. And how do you make them? Are they knights in shining armor, or are they sort of sleazy guys in dirty raincoats like Columbo? And Columbo is a really good example in a way of having your cake and eating it too, because he is a sort of schlubby guy. He's the opposite of a dashing Sherlock Holmes, who somehow seems to be what I would call a knight errant in the modern world. And Columbo, I suppose, is also a knight errant, but his armor isn't quite so shiny. Right. And that's sort of interesting. But when you read about Anthony Pellicano or detectives that get sent out to paw through people's garbage and then report back to the National Enquirer, it ain't necessarily that encouraging.
Right. It's not as glamorous as it all appears to be, that's for sure. What is glamorous is, so to speak, the adventure of the peculiar protocols. I just wanted to read a little something here, and let's get into this again from the New York Times. Once again, the game is afoot. Brilliantly rendered and ever faithful to the Sherlockian canon, Holmes and Watson and the world they inhabit come to life vividly in this story that is entertaining, informative, and enthralling as it is important and unexpectedly relevant to the modern world. This is a tour de force not to be missed, and I want to talk a little bit about, without giving anything away, we've been, I've not wanted to do that, I've been trying to dance around a little bit, but I mean, Sherlock Holmes in the past has never won every single match, so to speak, and he doesn't solved every single problem. So I wonder, in this adventure, there's not. I guess we could say this is not a guarantee that he's going to win all the time, and that is something that certainly makes these novels that you write even more interesting, because it's possible that he may not win. Correct?
I think that somebody said that a lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is putting on its shoes. Maybe in this story, Holmes is given an assignment that is, from the get-go, not really possible. He does a remarkable job, if I say so myself. He does a terrific job, but in the end, what he's encountering is so enormous that it's not within his power. It might have been, I suppose, within his power if he'd been brought onto the case earlier, but he wasn't, for the simple reason that the case itself had come to no one's attention until the sort of the cat was out of the bag, the toothpaste was out of the tube, however you want to phrase it.
Interesting. So that makes it intriguing to take a look at this story. With that in mind, there's some traveling that goes on here as well. There's no doubt that he leaves his hometown, let's put it that way, and travels throughout the parts of the world. Is that correct?
Well, he goes into the heart of Tsarist Russia in the year 1905, and Russia is in the midst of its first revolution. The actual overthrow of the Tsars did not happen until the middle of the First World War, 1917. But in fact, there was an earlier attempt. Russia was in a disastrous war with Japan, and Japan was beating Russia into a pulp. And in the midst of that, sailors on board the battleship Potemkin mutinied. They mutinied over terrible food, and the citizens of the nearby city of Odessa, where the battleship was anchored, joined the mutiny and joined the mutineers. And that's the Russia into which Holmes and Watson journey on board the Orient Express on their own particular errand or assignment, if that helps.
Oh, and the Orient Express brings to light, certainly makes it come alive a little bit for us, as we can recognize that and recognize the historical background of this. It's going to be a lot of fun to get involved with the adventure of the Peculiar Protocols by Nicholas Meyer, and it may put a smile, it may put a frown on your face. You don't know where you're going to go with this, which is great, and a mystery unto itself as to what we're getting from this novel. But we do know we're getting great entertainment and a great read, that's for sure. It's on Amazon.com, The Adventure of the Peculiar Protocols. Before we go out, a little something here from the Library Journal. The book is fabulous. Holmes enthusiasts will relish this well-crafted novel. So if you've been following any of the Sherlock Holmes adventures in any of the incarnations recently or in the past, the recent past, this will be something that is totally, I would suggest, different than Elementary and these other incarnations that we're seeing in the movies and so forth. I would suggest that you're a little more true to the Arthur Conan Doyle character. Would you say that would be correct?
Well, I'm trying. It's interesting because this is a novel. Again, I'm trying not to give too much away. This is a novel about a forgery, and I am, I suppose, myself, a forger if I'm trying to write like Doyle or like Watson. So there's a slight Hall of Mirrors thing going on here. And I can try to be like Doyle, but of course I'm not. And the interesting thing about, and think about this, all works of art are ineluctably, inevitably, products of the time in which they were created. So Mozart doesn't just sound like Mozart, he also sounds like late 18th century Middle European music, just as Renoir isn't just always Renoir, but he's also 19th century French Impressionism. So that's all fine and good until you come to the subject of forgery. Because once you come to a forger's work, they too are inevitably products of the time in which they were created. So some forgeries, which at the time are quite celebrated and accepted as genuine, and you look at them 50 years later and you go, wait a minute, this is not late 18th century Middle European music. This was written in 1920. I can hear it. Or you look at, the paintings of Van Meegeren, who was passing off his paintings as Vermeers in the 1930s, and at the time everybody bought into it. But you look at it now, and it's all Art Deco. So I assume my forgeries will reveal themselves as well as time goes on, or maybe right away. Somebody read it and goes, wait a minute, this isn't Doyle.
Well, I'll tell you, it's worthwhile to take a look at The Adventure of the Peculiar Protocols and the other 3 novels from Nicholas Meyer as with respect to Sherlock Holmes. He also wrote a book with respect to Star Trek, and there are others. But let's focus on and take a look at The Adventure of the Peculiar Protocols. Nicholas Meyer, thank you so much for spending so much time with us. We enjoyed it. We had a great time, and everything old is new again, and we're looking forward to the next time.
Thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure.
It's great to hear. Thank you so much. We'll be back next week on Everything Old is New Again. Talk all things pop culture. We'll be back right after this.